Good day to you all, and welcome to This Is Where I Land. Our first reflection is going to be about freedom from expectation. Here's the questions I've been sitting with this week. Are you living according to your own expectations or someone else's? This week, I found myself coming back to a story, The Truman Show. If you've never seen it, Truman spends his entire life inside a world that was designed for him. Every relationship, every conversation, every expectation about who he should become. Someone else created it. The heartbreaking part is that the life he believes he chose was chosen for him. And for most of his life, he doesn't even realize it. And I started wondering how many of us are living a quieter version of that. Maybe no one's watching us with hidden cameras, but we still wake up every day trying to be the person someone else expected us to be: a parent, a teacher, a boss, even society. Sometimes even a younger version of ourselves. At some point, we stop asking, what do I actually want? And start asking, what am I supposed to want? I think that's one of the easiest ways to slowly lose yourself. Now, I want to tell you a personal story. I've been thinking about where this question came from for me. A few weeks ago, I was at a training. We were talking about communication, and I admitted something that I'd known about myself for a long time. We were discussing student behavior and how we handled different situations throughout the day. So I asked the group how they would respond to a particular scenario. After getting some feedback, I said, I've always had a hard time saying the thing that needs to be said. Conflict has never come naturally to me, and I'm a peacemaker. I like harmony. I like people getting along. Sometimes, if keeping the peace means staying quiet, that's exactly what I'll do. The instructor looked at me and smiled. He said, well, I think we have our first admission that you're a pushover. I heard a few chuckles amongst the crowd. Honestly, it caught me off guard. My first reaction was, ouch. But after I sat with it, I realized he wasn't completely wrong. Later that same day, something happened that proved his point. The instructor asked me a question. I started answering. Before I could finish, the woman sitting across from me looked at me and went, shh. She wanted to leave. The instructor had been talking for a long time and was kind of long winded. And I know she didn't want to be there. She was ready for that class to end. So I stopped talking immediately. I didn't even question it, and I didn't finish my thought. I just got quiet. And here's what stayed with me afterward. It wasn't that someone told me to be quiet. People say things all the time. What stayed with me was how quickly I agreed, how quickly I decided maybe my voice isn't that important. I didn't say, actually, I'd like to finish what I was saying. I didn't say, I deserve the same opportunity to answer the question that anyone else does. I simply disappeared. When I drove home that day, I kept thinking about what had happened. Not because someone had told me to be quiet. What stayed with me was how quickly I decided that someone else's comfort was more important than my own voice. And that made me wonder, how many times have I done that in my life without even realizing it? The truth is, I don't think that moment began in that classroom. It had been building for a long time. I just didn't recognize it until then. I think it started years ago. Somewhere along the way, I learned that keeping the peace was more important than speaking the truth, that harmony was more important than honesty, that being liked was more important than being fully myself. And maybe some of you have learned that same lesson. The strange thing about expectations is that we usually don't notice we're even carrying them. They're quiet, invisible. Occasionally, they sound like, don't make people uncomfortable. Don't be too emotional. Don't speak unless you're right. Don't disappoint people. And even don't rock the boat. And after hearing those messages long enough, they stop sounding like someone else's voice. They start sounding like our own. I don't think freedom always looks like quitting your job or moving across the country or making some huge dramatic change. Sometimes freedom looks much smaller than that. Sometimes freedom looks like finishing your sentence. Sometimes it looks like disappointing someone because you're finally being honest, and that's uncomfortable, especially if you've spent your whole life believing your job was to make everyone else comfortable. The older I get, the less interested I am in being like everyone or even being liked by everyone. And the more interested I am in becoming honest with myself, because here's what I've realized: no matter who you've become, someone will always think you're too much. Someone else will think you're not enough. You can spend your whole life trying to become everyone's version of enough, and you'll never get there because everyone's definition is different. So maybe enough was never something other people were qualified to define in the first place. Maybe that's your job. Now, I want to be honest about something. I'm not standing here because I've mastered this. Obviously, I haven't. I still replay conversations in my head after they're over. I still wonder if I talked too much or not enough. I still catch myself trying to keep everyone comfortable. So, this isn't me standing on a mountaintop telling you how to live your life. This is me sitting beside you, trying to become a little more honest every day. Because reflection isn't about proving we're right, it's about becoming more honest with ourselves and with each other and with the life that we're actually living. But here's what changed for me after that training. I realized something. I've spent so much of my life believing that kindness meant making myself smaller, that keeping the peace meant staying quiet. But those aren't the same thing. Being kind doesn't require abandoning yourself, and keeping the peace isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it comes at the expense of your own voice. So maybe freedom isn't becoming louder. Maybe freedom is simply believing your voice deserves to exist in the room, even when someone else would rather you stay quiet. Because if we spend our lives editing ourselves to fit everyone else's expectations, we eventually forget what our own voice sounds like. And I don't want that anymore. Not for myself and not for you. I want to become someone who can be both compassionate and courageous, someone who can be kind without disappearing. So, this week, here are the few questions I have for you. Whose expectations shaped your idea of who you were supposed to be? What expectations are you still carrying that no longer belong to you? And if you stopped trying to become everyone else's version of enough, if you let go of every expectation that was never really yours to carry, who would you finally become? Not who they expect you to become. People pleasing doesn't always sound like yes. Sometimes it sounds like the silence that follows when we don't say what needed to be said. So maybe this week you'll notice the moments when you make yourself smaller or when you choose to finish your sentence. Maybe you'll discover that freedom doesn't always look like changing your whole life. It simply looks like telling the truth about who you are. If this reflection gave you something to think about this week, I'd love to hear where it took you. Leave your thoughts in the comments because I think we learn something when we reflect together. Because maybe the most important conversations we'll ever have are the ones we have with ourselves. Until next Sunday, keep asking good questions, keep becoming, and remember, wherever you are in your journey, I'm glad this is where we landed today. I'll see you next week.